In the late 1500s, the British caravel Mersey sailed out of Plymouth to prove a faster Atlantic crossing. The crew were calm, experienced, and used to hard water. Nothing about this voyage was meant to be strange, but somewhere south of the usual road, the ocean began changing. The water warmed, sea life vanished, the surface went flat and black, and the hull started taking blows from below that felt intentional. The men swore they were being sized up by something that should not have existed. So before we continue, please make sure you leave a like and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. I served aboard the caravel Mersey out of Plymouth in the year when frost stayed late on the fields and summer came on a hard wind. The ship measured only a little more than 20 paces stem to stern, with a square foresail and a lateen on the mizzen. We carried barrels of rye biscuit, salt beef, dried peas, and water that turned stale within days. Our orders were to test a faster line across the Atlantic by running south to the latitude of the Azores, then west with a steady wind until we turned for soundings. The captain, Edward Aldrich, wanted his name on a chart that could shorten a crossing. I kept the log and the chest of instruments. I had served on 2 voyages before and had both good teeth and a steady hand, which counted for more than speech. Our company was close and wary. Master Hargreaves set the noon with his astrolabe and made our dead reckoning at dawn. He trusted his numbers and did not like debate. Owen Price had hunted whales from Basque boats and had scars on his forearms where a line had stripped skin to meat. He carried a long iron of his own and sharpened it each night by the foremast, by habit rather than order. Ned Tripp was 14 and quick on blocks and lines, and he tried to copy the walk of older men. Parson Whitlow kept a small Bible in an oilskin packet and said prayers at sunset. The surgeon Bull kept his knives wrapped in linen and drank little. When the captain walked the deck at night, he rubbed the small of his back with his thumb as if it hurt him. He thought no one saw it. We cleared Ushant with a hard reach and a grey sea. The wind held for 2 days and nights and then fell away. Biscay gave us a slow swell that lifted and set the hull without pause. Pitch oozed from the seams in the afternoon. The rigging creaked in a steady rhythm. Rats came up from the hold after dark, and Ned chased them with a length of rope. By the 5th day we had the sun clean at noon, and Master Hargreaves said our line was true. A shoal of porpoises ran the bow, and Owen laughed and asked for a handspike. The captain would not allow it. He wanted speed, not blood. The first change was small and easy to ignore. The water temperature rose in a span of hours without a change in wind. When I dipped a bucket, the wood felt warm in my palms. A smell hung off it that was not the usual brine. It was sharp and metallic. The parson said it was only a pocket of warm water. Hargreaves said the same, and looked at the sun again, as if it might confirm him. That night, the sea lost its surface ripple and lay in long rolls. There was no break or white edge. The wake behind us smoothed almost at once. I wrote that down because I had not seen it before. 2 days later, the birds stopped coming. In the Channel and Biscay, they came and went with the wind, but always a few circled us at dawn. On that day, the sky stayed empty. Ned said nothing until noon, and then he stood by the shrouds and watched the horizon as if a line of men would appear there. Owen told him not to call luck by name. The captain said we were far from any coast, and birds had no business with us. He said it with a flat voice, and he pulled again at the small of his back. The third change was the sound. At first, I heard it through the hull when I leaned to the scuppers to rinse a pan. It was not thunder and not a crack. It was a deep knock, spaced out as if some heavy object struck wood from a distance. No one spoke of it until evening because a man alone can be wrong. When the second watch took the deck, the sound came again, and this time the deck planks carried it through our boots. Owen raised his head and stared into the dark sea without a word. Parson Whitlow began to speak, and then set his jaw. The captain told me to write, and I did. I set down the hours and the number of knocks. There were 3 in the first hour and 2 in the second, then none for a while. The wind held, and our speed did not change. The 4th change came with the morning light. A dead pilot whale floated on our starboard beam with the skin torn in 2 long strips from the neck to the dorsal ridge. The edges were clean, not ragged, and no scavengers worked the wound. The flesh under the skin looked pale and tight. Owen stood on the rail and looked down at it, and did not speak for a long time. Then he said only that no boathook was to touch it. The captain agreed and kept the ship off the carcass. We watched it fall away astern, and I saw that the belly had not been opened. Whatever had cut it had stopped after the skin and fat. Bull marked it as a curiosity and went below. Nothing happened at noon. Hargreaves called out our latitude, and the captain nodded. We ate biscuit and peas and drank water that tasted of the barrel. Ned asked me what I wrote in the log when nothing happened. I told him I wrote nothing and saved ink. He smiled at that and then looked out over the rail again. The light went out early that day. A bank of cloud rose in the west and ran across the sun. Though the wind did not change, the surface lost more detail until it looked smooth, and I could see our reflection in it when I leaned out by the chains. It was not a clear image. The hull made a darker shape under the water, and beyond that there was only dark. When I lowered the lead line for soundings, it fell without a touch for 150 fathoms, and then it fell more. The line drifted to the south as if a slow current took it. I called the depth and the set, and Hargreaves wrote them down. And he frowned and started to say something, and stopped. At dusk, we set the lantern at the stern. The flame made a small ring of light on the wake, and a pale smear on the lower mizzen. Men speak more at that hour, or not at all. On that night, they stood near, and even Ned let the rats pass without a chase. Owen sat on the forehatch with his iron across his knees. The metal looked dull, and he rubbed it with oil. Near midnight, the hull lurched without a change in wind or sea. It was a single heavy shove from below and to port. The yard creaked and then steadied. The men froze in their places. The captain came up from his cabin and said only, "Hands, keep still." The shove came again, harder. The hull shifted a hand's breadth to starboard, and the water made a heavy slap against the planks. The lantern swung and threw shadows across the deck. I felt the shove in my teeth. Hargreaves moved to the rail and leaned out. He saw only black water. The third shove hit the keel dead on. It lifted the bow a little and set it down again. The mast shook. The shrouds hummed. Owen stood. "That is not a log," he said. "That comes on purpose." He spoke with a steady voice that made the others breathe again because the word was plain. The captain said, "Stand by," and we set more men at the braces in case of sudden wind. There was none. We waited. Half an hour passed with no sound and no shove. The sea stayed smooth. Hargreaves tapped the compass box and waited for the needle to settle. It hung 2 points off north and then settled where it should. He said nothing and closed the lid. At dawn, we found marks on the hull. The carpenter Sutter went over the side in a bowl-in with a mallet in his belt. He ran his hands over the planks and called up what he felt long shallow grooves in 2 places, deep scrapes in another, and a round hole the size of a man's fist where the pitch had been torn free. He found a splinter of hard white material wedged in the edge of a groove. We brought him up, and he set the splinter on the deck. It looked like a piece of tooth-heavy and smooth with a faint grain that ran in one direction. Bole picked it up and pressed his thumb against it. It did not give. Owen said nothing for a long time, and then said only, "It fed here and tasted tarp." The day grew hot without weight in the air. The wind eased. We drifted more than we sailed. The men spoke only when called upon. Ned cleaned the deck with sand and water until the planks showed their grain. He kept looking toward the bow where Sutter had examined the holes. The captain kept to a circle of steps and rubbed his back. Hargreaves checked the sun at noon and made a long sum that ended in a small frown. By late afternoon, the water grew darker beneath us. The change was not in the sky. It came from below. Standing at the rail, I saw a haze in the depths that moved across our path. It was not a cloud of silt. It moved with steadier edges. I called Owen to the rail. He leaned out and stared in silence. The shape passed under us and went out beyond the starboard beam. It held together for a time and then broke. We could not measure its length, but it exceeded our own. At sunset, we reefed and set a watch with orders to strike the bell at any knock or lurch. The parson asked to speak the evening prayer. The captain nodded. We stood with our heads down and listened. The words were short. When he finished, the sea gave a single thud under the stern, and the bell rang on its own where it hung by the helm. No one moved. Night came on with no stars because the cloud held. The lantern circle on the wake looked smaller than before. The carpenter checked the bilge for leaks and found none. The surgeon laid out cloth and water by the main mast and said it was only prudence. The captain did not answer. He stood by the taffrail and watched the water. Toward the middle of the night, the sea parted ahead of the bow without wind, and a swell came at us from the dark. It was not a wave with a crest. It was a lift that traveled under us and bent the hull. The mast leaned back and returned. The bell sounded again. Owen gripped his eye and he stared into the black water. He did not blink. At first light, the captain called all hands and set out tasks without comment on the night. He told Sutter to nail extra battens over the worst grooves and to pack the seams twice with oakum and pitch. He told me to keep the log to quarter hours. He told Owen to lay out every iron and coil 3 lines by the foremast. Hargreaves checked the compass again and then took his slate and made a new course that favored more southerly water. He did not say why. I felt a steady pull in my stomach that did not come from hunger. I wanted to see the sun high and the sea ordinary. The feeling did not pass. We tried to make speed, but the sail hung flat. The sea stayed level and without chop. The crew's steps sounded louder than usual. Bole asked me for a measure of vinegar to rinse cloth. He said he wanted it at hand. I brought it and set it by the mainmast. He looked at the stern and kept his hand still. By mid-morning, the smell from the water grew stronger. It carried a sour note like stale iron. Ned called from the bow. I went forward with Owen. A long strip of hide floated there, about the length of a tall man. It looked like skin from a great fish pail on one side, and darker on the other, with small pits where the hair would be on a seal, but larger and set wider. The cut edge showed fat and clean layers. Owen poked it with a boat hook. It was thick and dense. He did not bring it aboard. He let it slide away and wiped the hook with an oily rag. He did not speak until the piece fell astern. Then he said, "It feeds near us. It sheds that much without care." At noon, Hargreaves took the sun. His answer was shorter than usual. He closed the astrolabe case and stood still for a full minute before writing his number. The captain asked him for the line he wanted. He tapped a spot on the chart farther south a degree. He said. The captain gave the order. We adjusted the braces and eased the helm to hold the new course. The ship answered, but slowly. The afternoon brought a test. Owen asked leave to try a bait. The captain looked at him and gave a small nod. Owen chose a quarter of salt beef from the barrel, wrapped it with line, and fixed the end through the ring of a stout cask. He paid it out astern, 12 fathoms, and made the line fast to a bit. The meat dragged in the wake. The cask bumped behind it. The men stood along the rail without jokes or breath through the teeth. We waited. The pull came without warning. The line snapped taut, and the bit groaned. The cask skipped once and then went under, drawn down like a stone. The ship slowed as if held by a tow. The line burned a little smoke where it crossed the wood. Sutter poured seawater on it. The strain lasted 10 breaths and then let go. The line went slack. The cask shot up, struck the surface on its side, and rolled. It bore deep gouges along 2 planks, each mark even, with a spacing like teeth. One end of the cask was staved in, not crushed, but split by a single force. Owen hauled it aboard with Ned and 2 more. He set a finger into one of the grooves and pressed until his nail bent. The wood had not splintered along the grain. The groove cut clean across it. He said to no one, "This is a jaw with more reach than a boat." We set the ruined cask by the mast. Bole touched the marks and then turned his hand and pressed the back of his knuckles into them for size. He looked at the splintered end, then at the tooth fragment Sutter had found earlier, which I had wrapped and kept in the instrument chest. Bole asked me for it. I brought it out. He held the fragment to a groove in the cask. The curve fit well enough to stop speech for a moment. Parson Whitlow said he had seen such stones in a cabinet in Exeter, called tongue stones by the old men, and a scholar who visited said they were teeth of a kind of great shark from old earth beds. The parson's voice shook on the word teeth. Hargreaves said only, "If it is that, it lives now." The sky dimmed toward evening, though the cloud thinned a little. With the first dark, a faint light began to show in the water, not bright, but enough that a hand dipped in and moved would make a pale trace. I had seen such light before in warmer seas. On that night, the glow marked more than the hull. It marked a shape below Usa, long shadow moving with steady turns. Each turn shifted to smears of light where the edges cut the water. The shape circled once and faded, and then appeared again wider around. Ned gripped the rail with both hands. No one told him to let go. Owen fetched his iron. He stood ready, but he kept his arm close and did not show the point. The first strike on the steering came at the change of the watch. The helm jerked in Willis's hands and kicked twice, as if shoved from the rudder. The tiller rope creaked, and the pins rang in their holes. Willis called out. The captain reached him in 3 steps and took the bar with him. The stern dipped. A heavy thud rose through the planks. Then a scraping began along the lower stern, post slow and rough, as if a hard surface pressed and moved there. Sutter and I ran aft with a lantern and leaned over. We saw a pale plane under the waterboard and flat pass under the counter and vanish. The scraping stopped. The helm answered again but felt dull. "It has bruised the rudder," Sutter said. "May have bent the gutchon." The captain nodded once. "We will try her on sail trim," he said. He spoke without heat, but I heard the weight in it. We rigged braces to steer with sheets if the helm lost more bite. The second strike came fast. It hit the stern more squarely and drove the bow off 3 points. The lantern swung and banged on the taffrail. Willis swore and then caught himself. Ned stumbled and struck his shoulder on a pin. He bit his lip and stayed upright. The captain ordered the aftermost sail eased to help turn back. The ship answered with delay. The water behind us boiled and then went flat again. No fin cut the surface. Only the dim light in the sea showed a blur moving to starboard and dropping back. The third strike threw a man. It came not at the stern but along the port side, just forward of the mainmast. The hull lurched and a sheet block jumped on its pin. Ned had just run past with a coil, and the jump took his feet. He went to the rail, hit it with one side, and tipped over. I reached and caught air. He vanished without a cry. The water glowed where he went in. I saw his shape just under the surface, arms spread. The crew froze for a half breath. Then Owen threw a line. The coil fell well. Ned's hand floundered and closed. The line jerked. A darker mass slid under him from forward to after breadth, wider than 2 men. A tail moved once and stirred a path of light. The mass rolled a little and showed a pale underside, then sank. We hauled. Ned came up with both hands on the rope and his face gray. He cleared the rail and lay on the deck. His left calf bled in 2 long cuts, clean and shallow, not a bite. He had struck a rough edge, bowl-bounded with swift hands. Ned did not look back over the side. He stared at the mast and swallowed hard. I felt sick relief, as if I had been holding my breath since he fell. The crew spoke in short bursts now. Willis said the helm felt wrong at center. Sutter said he would go over the stern at first light to look if the sea allowed it. The captain agreed and told us to strike the lantern at the taffrail and set 2 smaller ones forward to change the light on the wake. He told Owen to keep the irons near but to hold until he gave word. He told me to mark the hour and note wind, sea, and any noise. I wrote as fast as I could, form letters. Near midnight, the water brightened in a wide ring, as if many small creatures flashed at once. The ring moved with a steady speed and crossed our path. The ship's bow met it and passed through. As we crossed, the knock came again, but lighter, like a test. Then a head broke the surface just beyond the starboard beam. It was wide and blunt with the mouth closed. The upper jaw showed a line of small pits. The eye was set far to the side and looked forward only a little. It watched our hull for a long breath, then sank without a splash. The light in the water ran along its back for a moment and then went out. No one spoke. Owen lifted his ire and set it down again. "Not that way," he said in a low voice. "We do not strike a maker of swells with a handstick." Parson Whitlow began a prayer under his breath. He cut it short when the captain looked at him and gave a small shake of the head. The men needed their ears clear. The captain ordered quiet and nothing else. He stood by the helm with Willis and kept his hand on the bar. His other hand went once to his back and stopped there for a moment. I saw it and then looked away. It was a private pane. The ship held a slow southwesterly line, held almost entirely by the trim of the sails now. The helm gave little help. Before dawn, Sutter rigged a line and went under the stern with a tool bag on his chest. We tried a new test at first light. Owen made a bundle of spare rope and wrapped it around a spar end to make a bumpkin. He fixed 2 iron hooks to it facing backward. He lowered it off the starboard quarter on a chain so it hung a fathom under the surface. If the thing rammed there, it would take iron in its skin. He stood with the chain in hand and watched the water. The sea stayed level. The glow faded as the sun lifted behind cloud. For a while, I thought we had seen the worst. Then the water to port swelled in a long rise. The ship tilted toward it. A back broke the surface. It was not a roll like a whale's. It rose straight up for a span and fell, showing a width that ran longer than our boat. The skin looked scarred in patches. I saw 2 round pits set far apart. They were not eyes. They were old wounds that had healed deep. The tail came last, a heavy wedge that moved once and set the sea running toward us. When the back fell, the bumpkin chain jerked. Owen braced his feet and held. The chain groaned and then went slack. He hauled in fast. 2 hooks were gone. The wood had split. He set the stump on deck and stared at it without a word. Hargreaves said in a clear voice, "We must change water." He pointed again to the chart farther south and west. "If we hold this set, we may cross a line to cooler sea." The captain looked at the dull sails, and then at the wake. "We will try," he said. He ordered what canvas we could stand and small adjustments to angle. We eked out a little more speed. The men moved with care as if each footfall could shake the thing loose or call it back. The next strike did not aim for wood. It came from under the bow and lifted us. The forefoot cleared the water for a moment. The hull slammed down and the seams creaked. A barrel in the hold shifted and thumped. Sutter went below to chock it and came back up with sweat on his face despite the mild air. "If it splits the stem," he said to me low enough that only I heard, "we will pump until our arms fail. And then we will not pump." I nodded, because any words would have shown more fear than I wanted to show. By late morning, Ned could stand on his leg. He asked to take his watch only to feel useful. The captain let him hold a line by the foremast and told him to speak at once if he felt the deck jump. Ned gave one short nod and did as told. He did not look over the side. Toward noon, we saw fish again for the first time in days. A small school of mackerel or something like them flashed ahead of the bow. They did not scatter and dart as usual. They moved in a tight cluster and stayed near the surface as if pressed from below. The cluster cut across our path and vanished to starboard. Moments later, the water ahead darkened. The ship ran into a slick that spread farther than I could see to either side. It smelled of oil and old meat. Fat globules clung to the bow and slid back along the planks. The deck grew slippery. Ned fetched sand again and worked it underfoot. He did not complain or ask questions. He worked as if each sweep might please something he could not name. In the middle of that slick, a shape rose and turned on its side. The head showed again, wider now in the clear light of day. The mouth opened a hand's breadth. Rows of teeth showed inside, not needles, but broad and triangular, set in ranks. The mouth closed, and the head sank. I had seen sharks taken off Madeira. This mouth outsized any of those by a count I could not make. My stomach turned not at the gore, at the size. Hargreaves drew breath and let it out slow. "We measure our world wrongly," he said, almost to himself. Then he shut his mouth, as if he had given more away than he wished. The captain made a hard choice then. He ordered powder brought up. We carried 2 small swivel pieces and a handful of balls, because the company expected no fight at sea. He told Willis and Owen to load them anyway. "If it rises near enough," he said, "we will give it metal." Owen checked the touch holes and priming. He set one piece on the bow and one on the stern. The crew moved with focus now. Fear had become a list of tasks. I kept the log and then put down the quill for a moment and leaned my hands on the lid of the chest. I thought of harbors and chalk cliffs and the sound of carts on stone. I allowed that thought and then set it aside. We were not near any of those things. We were here with a hull of oak, 2 small guns, hooks, lines, and a thing that had taken iron and did not care. The only way was forward into whatever the sea and the day would bring. I closed the chest and stood up. The captain raised his hand for quiet. He looked from face to face. He did not give a speech. He pointed to the bow and then to the stern. "Watch," he said, "and do not waste a shot." Before we fired any shot, the sea around us went dead calm again. There was no wave, no wind, no cross movement. It looked like the surface froze, but it was still water. The captain stepped toward the bow gun and leaned a hand against the bull. He watched the slick around us, and his eyes narrowed not in panic, but in calculation. Owen stayed at the stern gun and kept both hands on the grips. He was breathing slow through his nose in a controlled way that men use when they have already accepted pain in advance. Parson Whitlow moved toward Ned and stood next to him. They did not speak. Ned held a line in his hands, but the rope wasn't tied to anything at the moment. He just needed something solid to hold. His hands shook once, then steadied. The boy was frightened, but he had not lost himself. Bole knelt and checked the lashings of his bandage kit again, even though it didn't need checking. His hands needed work, or they would start trembling. Hargreaves took another latitude sight, even though it was pointless in the cloud cover. Every man was holding on to some action because standing still and waiting for that thing to choose. Its moment felt worse than anything it could do. The sound that came next was not a knock. It was a slow grinding under the keel, trailing from bow to stern. The timbers vibrated through our boots. It felt like a slow drag of heavy bone on oak. Sutter gripped the rail and closed his eyes. "It is measuring," he said. He set it low. I do not think he meant to speak it aloud. I do not know how he concluded that, but the moment he said it, every man knew he was right. The grinding stopped at the stern. Owen tightened his jaw and readied the gun. The head didn't rise first. The tail came up from the water in a steep arc, only part of it visible, but enough to see the scale in daylight. The surface broke around it, and I saw the scars agowled, deep, healed lines. It swung downward out of sight. The back rose next, higher than before, directly off the stern where Owen's gun was already pointed. It stayed there long enough for every man aboard to see that the scars were not single injuries. They were layered from years. Something had fought this creature many times and failed to kill it. The captain whispered, almost without meaning to, "God help us." Owen waited until the massive shape began to turn. Then he fired. The shot struck slightly aft of the center line of that broad head. A plume of water and smoke shot up. The echo rolled long and flat across the still sea. The back vanished instantly. The stern dipped down. The rudder jerked so violently that the tiller rope snapped and lashed across the deck like a whip. Willis barely dodged it and fell sideways against the taffrail. He hit his ribs hard and gasped, but stayed conscious. The creature struck under the hull. It hit us off-center to starboard midship. Every man grabbed whatever he could. The blow nearly rolled us so far that the lee rail dipped underwater. Water washed across the deck. The bow swung off course hard. Barrels broke loose. Bull was thrown onto his hands and knees and slid 3 feet before stopping himself against a cleat. The sound of that impact went through the ribs and skull more than the ears. It was a pressure impact. My chest felt concussed from inside. When the hull righted, the sea stayed still again. No current, no wind, only the faint ring of phosphorescent specks displacing where the hull rocked slightly in place. The ship barely advanced. Owen kept staring at the wake where the thing had vanished. His hands still held the gun grips, though he had already fired. His knuckles showed white. He did not release until the captain told him to stand down and reload, while Owen and Willis reset the gun. Sutter and Hargreaves crawled to the starboard rail to judge the hull beneath. Sutter used a sounding pole lowered against the outer planks. He tapped and listened. The third plank below the midline rang dull. He said, "Crushed grain there. Not hold, but weakened." The captain nodded once. "We must not take another strike like that." His voice stayed flat, but there was no distance in his eyes anymore. He felt the edge now like the rest of us. We held our course with what forward motion we still had. The sea continued to smell of metal and old meat. The air above the deck felt warmer than before, but not by much. There was no wind. It was as though the ocean around us had become its own sealed chamber. Ned asked the captain quietly, "What is it after?" The captain answered honestly, "I think it is curious, and now it is angry." Ned swallowed and continued gripping the line. Near midday, a fin rose ahead of Usnot, the creature's fin, a smaller one, black and thin. Then another, sharks, 4 or 5. They moved erratically, then suddenly fled as if pushed from beneath. The water bulged upward, but nothing showed. The sharks fled the way a horse flees a fire. They did not return. The creature surfaced dead ahead. The mouth opened wide this time. It was silent. The rows of teeth were clean and unbroken. It did not move toward us suddenly. It hovered in the water, with only its head above the surface. The size of that mouth, in direct proportion to our bow, was something no man on earth would have believed if he had not stood where we stood. If it lunged forward even half its own length, it could have taken the bow off and crushed half the men before we could react. Hargreaves said to the captain in a low voice, "We cannot outrun it. There is no wind." The captain nodded, but did not take his eyes off the creature. Then the thing closed its mouth and sank slowly straight downward. It sank without a ripple. It sank as though it decided to think. For the first time all voyage, the crew spoke openly, without looking for permission. Why would it stop? Willis asked. Owen said, "It is thinking about how to take the ship whole." The parson said nothing. His hands clamped around the tiny Bible packet, like a clamp in a vice. He did not open it, but he did not put it away either. The captain looked at each man. "We do not split or panic. We prepare. We set traps. We make this ship taste of iron. Sutter, fetch every spare hook and nail. Ball, bandages ready. Tourniquet ready. Hargreaves, chart a direct southwest bearing toward colder water. If we find cooler sea, perhaps it leaves us." He turned to Owen last. "If it rises again within iron reach, Strike. Do not hesitate. We have no second chances. Owen nodded once. The nod was slow and full. I went below to check the build. The keel seam we worried about was holding, but there was a new flex crack along a frame joint, 3 timbers forward. It wasn't leaking yet. It would if the hull was struck there again. I closed the hatch and stood still for a moment in the dim hold. I felt the coldness in my gut that comes when a man knows numbers are turning against him. That thing was not finished. It was only beginning to examine us. When I came back topside, the sea still lay smooth as polished stone. The captain ordered one last attempt to bait it into a wound before nightfall. But this time the bait would hold forged metal that would not simply break away. We prepared the trap in complete silence. Before we lowered the trap, the captain made sure every man understood the plan. We would suspend 2 linked anchors from the starboard quarter, set 3 fathoms down, lashed to chain and not rope. Between the anchors, we fixed a cage of interlocked iron scrapnails, spikes, hooks, and the broken gun cask hoops we had split flat. Inside that cage, we fixed a barrel of salt beef. If the creature tore into it, there was no way for it to bite without taking iron through its mouth or jaw. And if it got tangled, the anchors would drag against the hull and slow it enough for Owen to strike at the head with an iron oar for the stern. Gun to put a shot directly into the skull at point blank. Not a single man argued. We all wanted one clean blow that would hurt it. We needed to show it that we were not only prey. We moved as one unit and lowered the trap slow. The chain rattled straight down. When the slack eased and the anchors took the weight, the cask sat suspended under the water. The captain did not want it drifting at whole depth. He wanted it low enough that the creature had to expose itself clear to strike. As soon as the final length of chain was fastened, we waited. The air felt heavier. The water stayed flat. Even the birds stayed gone. Ned sat on the deck with his back against the mainmast. His right hand held his line again, but his left rested lightly on his bandaged calf. He was pale but not withdrawn. His eyes stayed sharp. There was a quiet resignation in him that had not been there days earlier. The boy who chased rats with rope was gone. Something older now sat in his place. Bowles stayed kneeling next to his satchel. His face looked drained, but he was prepared for whatever came next. Parson Whitlow leaned near the rail, watching the smooth water, but he never let go of his Bible packet. Hargreaves kept the chart open against the mast support. He had found a path that, if wind returned, would take us across a line of current where water should be cooler. His finger tapped that line once every few minutes, as if reassuring himself that navigation still mattered in a place where reason barely applied. The captain stood near, the trap chain with his hand on the belaying pin. He stared at the place where the cask suspended below as if he could see through the water. When this begins, the captain said to all of us quietly, there will be no orders except one: strike and reload, nothing else. We all nodded. No one spoke again. The first sign came from deep below the bow, a faint hum that vibrated the whole not organic noise, pressure noise. The hum rose slow and then stopped. The smell changed in the air again, stronger and sharper. Then, a push of water rose beneath us. The surface bulged and lifted the hull, not like a swell, not spread wide. It lifted from directly beneath us. The creature was testing upward lift. The keel was forced upward several inches and then dropped again. The hull slapped the water flat. The captain gave no reaction. He only waited for the real strike. The second sign came from the chain. The chain links rattled once lightly, not enough to pull the anchors, just enough to tell us that something brushed it. Ned whispered. Without realizing, he spoke out loud. It knows every inch of the hull now. The chain rattled again, harder. The hull trembled. The chain groaned and stretched tight like a bowstring. We looked over the starboard quarter, 2 fathoms down. The water brightened as the phosphorescence was displaced by the mass below. It was moving directly at the trap. Owen raised his iron. Willis primed the stern gun. The captain clenched the pin hard enough that his knuckles turned white. A massive dark shape rose, fast, and rammed the anchors in the cask in one sudden lunge. The chain snapped tight so violently that the wood of the bit cracked. The hull jerked sideways. The cask splintered instantly in a violent churn of water and flashing light. We could see metal glint in the sea below as the scrap cage twisted. The creature shook the entire trap and then surged under the hull. The chain ripped 3 feet downward, then snapped back again so hard the deck cleat creaked. A deep roar of pressure sounded below, not audible through air, but through bone. Every man felt it. The creature was trying to wrench the anchors free. If it succeeded, it would drag the chain and leverage the hull into a break. "Hold the chain," the captain yelled. 4 men threw weight on the gear. The chain tore skin off Sutter's palms, but he kept his grip. The anchors held, the scrap cage held. Something was caught. The creature thrashed once, twice. The hull heeled over so sharply that water washed over half the starboard deck. Ned skidded and almost lost his grip, but the parson grabbed his shoulder and anchored him to the mast. Owen was already moving before the next shake. He knelt at the rail and leaned out, iron forward, waiting for the exact moment the head breached close enough. A third violent heave came from beneath. The chain slackened, then jerked again. The beast tried to roll. The anchor scraped under us. The metal grinding was unbearable. Sutter screamed through clenched teeth as the chain tore at his hands again. Then the head rose. It burst up half out of the water, a full 2-arm spans off the starboard rail. Jaws half open, mouth massive enough to take half the ship. Owen did not wait. He lunged downward with the iron and drove it deep just behind the right eye. The iron went into the socket. The handle shook in his grip. Blood burst out in a thick sheet. The creature shook its head once, and the iron shaft bent sideways, but did not tear free. The beast roared underwater. The whole sea seemed to vibrate with the sound. The creature crashed down and vanished. The chain ripped downward again and nearly pulled all 4 men off their feet. But then something changed. The tension slackened. The chain went slack. The anchors sagged dead weight again. It let go. The sea went still again. Every man stood frozen, waiting for a retaliatory strike. None came. For a long full minute, there was no sound at all besides shallow breath from exhausted men. Then a large spreading cloud of dark blood appeared far off the starboard bow. The glow in the water flickered inside that cloud, then thinned, then faded. Hargreaves whispered, "We wounded it. It retreats." Owen remained kneeling at the rail, staring down where his iron had vanished with the beast. His hands shook numbed with fear, with delayed force and aftermath. We waited 5 more minutes without movement or sound. When nothing returned, the captain finally exhaled and stepped back. "We mend what we can," he said. "We hold course. If the wind returns, we run for colder water. If it comes back, we finish what we started." He turned to Ned. "Boy, fetch sand. Clean blood off this deck." Ned nodded and got to work immediately. No hesitation. His face was grim but steady. I took the log and wrote the hour and the details. Owen stayed kneeling without moving for a long time. The parson put a hand on his shoulder briefly. Owen did not look up. He was not in shock. Not exactly. He was processing that he had put iron into something that every earlier age would have called impossible. Night came slowly. Still no wind. The sea remained unnaturally smooth, but that feeling of pressure under the hull was gone. We waited for night and whatever it might bring next. When night fell, the sky remained covered, but with thinner cloud. We could see faint starlight bleed through in patches, but no moon. The water lost all glow. The slick around us dispersed slowly. The blood cloud in the distance had drifted further off. The sea returned to being only heavy and flat. No wind. The ship barely inched forward under the weight of her own momentum and the slight swell that still traveled below the surface. The captain did not dismiss watches. He made everyone rotate in pairs. No one would be left alone at any post. He told me to keep writing but to stay at the mainmast with the others. Bowles set lanterns low and shielded on the deck so we would keep night vision out to the water. Owen sat near the stern gun with fresh powder and shot already measured and set. He had not spoken since the strike. His face was blank but focused. The parson prayed silently now without moving his lips. Hargreaves sat next to him and stared into the dark water knot with fear. But with a tired acceptance, we waited in half silence for hours. The ship settled into a new rhythm, not of normal sailing, but of cautious expectation. Every creak from the hull made men flinch slightly, then calm again when nothing followed. Sutter wrapped his palms and fingers carefully in strips of canvas, but the raw skin still showed. Bowles cleaned the wounds on his hands with vinegar, even though Sutter cursed and tried to pull back. "If you let it fester, you die for nothing," Bowles said. Sutter nodded and kept still through the burn. Around what felt like midnight, a slight wind stirred over the deck. It was not enough to fill sails, but enough to break the heat and stagnant pressure in the air. Every man noticed it. At the same moment, we looked up, each expecting maybe a shift that would let us move again. "Secure braces for when the wind lifts enough," the captain said quietly. He didn't want to break the tension. He spoke as if the creature could hear us. Ned stood and moved to help Owen at the stern. His leg held. He worked slower, but with steady coordination. That steadiness mattered more than speed. Ned had changed in the last day more than any man that young should. He listened more. He watched everyone. His fear had settled into something like sharpened discipline. There was no trace of shock or denial. A faint ripple broke the surface far out to port. Not big, just a disturbance. We all saw it. We waited. A second small ripple drifted near the first. Then nothing followed. Willis looked at me and whispered, "Could be whales again." I did not answer. None of us wanted to assume anything harmless. Nothing approached for another hour. Men began to breathe a little easier, but the captain did not lower guard. "It will return if it intends to finish us," he said. "We do not ease until wind sets us moving." Near the end of second watch, I saw faint current movement towards starboard. The slick had fully cleared now, and the water looked darker. The temperature at the surface felt slightly cooler when I dipped a bucket and tested by hand. I told the captain. Hargreaves confirmed it. The current might be shifting. If we could catch any wind at all, we might drift toward colder water sooner than expected. The captain gave a single nod. "Stay ready," he said to all of us. "This change is either our escape beginning or the trap tightening." The creature returned right after that. The return came without sound or warning. Its strike landed at the stern post again, but weaker and incomplete. It was more of a shove than a full ramming, as if testing if we still braced ourselves, as if it wanted to see if we believed it had gone fully away. Owen had been waiting exactly for such a test. The instant that shove hit, he swung the stern gun toward the disturbance and fired without waiting for a full breach. The shot struck just under the surface. There was a burst of water that shot far higher than the cannon should have created on its own. We all heard something under the water, then a low grinding movement followed by deeper displacement. The crew braced again in silence. The creature did not strike back immediately. It circled us instead. We felt the pressure rise again under the hull as it passed below, but it remained deeper this time. It was weaker. The wound had taken something from it. We could tell by the tone of its pressure sound. It seemed slower now. After 5 long passes beneath, the creature finally showed itself again, but not by rising. It surfaced far from the ship this time, maybe 500 yards to the west. We saw its back, not gliding toward us, but moving at a steady departure angle. It was leaving. The scar we had made behind the eye was visible from distance. It was an open, fresh gash across pale cartilage and hardened skin. It had no interest now in rushing us again. It was conserving strength. It sank without a final gesture. Owen stared at the spot where it vanished. He lowered his ironless hands and exhaled once. The parson closed both hands around his Bible and bowed his head in silent thanks. The captain kept standing still and watching the silent dark water long after it left. He didn't let go of that belaying pin until he was certain no sudden reversal would come. When he finally stepped away, we all understood the immediate danger had ended. At dawn the next morning, wind returned not hard, but steady and cold. The sea gained small waves again. The smell eased. The surface ripple finally returned. The water temperature continued dropping as we approached the line Hargreaves had marked. The crew worked sails without command. They all knew speed now mattered more than rest. By midday, the Mercy was moving at 4 full knots southwest. It felt like we were being allowed to leave. That night, the creature did not return. The next day, the smell was gone fully. The porpoises returned and ran our bow again. A small gull circled us at noon. The sea looked like any other sea-clean current. Fresh wind, normal waves. We had crossed into another region of water entirely. We made landfall weeks later in Plymouth. The captain wrote a formal report. Officials read it and dismissed half of it. They thought we exaggerated a whale. They thought we panicked in doldrums. They said sharks drift injured sometimes and leave odd marks. They believed only the parts that could be made smaller, but every man aboard that voyage signed the same technical entries in the ship log. We measured what we saw. We measured the tooth fragment. We measured the bite groove on the cask wood. We described the mouth exactly. We wrote only fact. Men in taverns laughed at pieces of the story when we told it quietly. But each man aboard Mercy knew there was no exaggeration. It happened exactly as logged. Some years later, another long tooth fragment from another place turned up in someone's private cabinet, and scholars began to talk again about ancient giant sharks that lived once and died with old seas. They said such things lived long before any man walked on earth. That was the beginning of men using a different word, Megalodon. We did not know that word at sea then, but we knew what hunted us. I never saw anything like it again in my lifetime. Ned grew into a man and served on several ships after this, before moving inland to raise a family. Owen stayed at sea and never hunted large sea life again. He said that once a man has struck iron into something that should not exist, he never again tries to prove himself against beasts. Hargreaves continued making charts and never spoke publicly about the event again. But in private he told me he never doubted the log a single day. The captain lived many more years and worked his back pain into habit until it never held him from sea duty again. On his last day alive, I visited him. I asked him if he ever thought we were one moment away from being swallowed whole that night. He said, "Not one moment, many." And then he said that he believed the only reason we survived was because we fought back. He told me to make sure the log was never altered just to be believed. I never altered a word.